I started to like movies when I was a child. I was born in Cuba in 1984. Remember George Orwell, 1984? Everything in Cuba till the 90s came from the Soviet Union, including some TV shows. I grew up with Russian cartoons, which of course I didn't understand. But early in the 90s, after the collapse of socialism, we started getting American movies. Almost at the same time, we got color TV. We were starving, but gosh, on TV everything was so beautiful and colorful. Movies were great. They were not only colorful, but most of them were movies with a beginning and an end. Lots of them were movies where the good guys would always overcome the bad ones. I remember The Lion King, Pretty Woman, Beauty and the Beast, Braveheart, Sister Act, and many more that I don't even know how to pronounce. We were captivated. To this day, most Cubans prefer American movies over any others. And I think the reason is simple. Who doesn't love movies with happy endings? We all do, because they reflect the way we dream the world should be. Movies about justice, freedom, and good guys overcoming the bad ones are still a great, colorful distraction when reality can sometimes be black and white. That's probably why Luke's gospel today seems a bit hard to take, because it is that part of the Bible that we call apocalyptic literature, which is not the best material for happy movies. Because in apocalyptic literatures, the bad guys are the ones running the show. Almost every passage from Luke's gospel in the last couple of months took place in the context of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. In today's reading, Jesus has finally entered Jerusalem. He knows what he is about to endure. He knows that things will turn bad first before they turn good. And he's concerned about his disciples and the fact that they could get discouraged or distracted. They were already amazed by the beauty and majesty of the temple and the way the temple was adorned. So before they get distracted, Jesus starts picturing for the disciples the reality they will need to face. The destruction of the temple, nation against nation, earthquakes, famines, etc. When it seems that it cannot get any worse is when it gets personal. You will be arrested. You will be persecuted. You will be put in prison. And when these things happen, don't even think that the end is close. No, there is still time. And that's when you need to testify and bear witness. I'll bet those words were as hard for the disciples to take as they were for Jesus to say, but they were absolutely necessary. They were Jesus' pastoral words to his disciples. Because when things start to crumble around us, that's when we need God's love and God's presence more than ever. With those hard words, describing the bad times that were about to come, Jesus reminded his disciples of three essential things: how far they've come, what to look forward to, and what to hold on to. when we look into the narrative of our faith, we know how much those words meant for the disciples. We know how they held on to God's love and how they bore witness through the toughest times. But what's the meaning of those words for us today as 21st century disciples? What does it mean to live as a person of faith when life is not always easy? When sickness and death and disasters of all kinds occur? Where do we see the hope? And how do we bear witness? Those are Jesus' questions for us today. How do we hold on to His love when we go through tough times? When our lives are not so colorful? When some endings are not necessarily happy? Those questions are important because that's when we tend to get distracted and lose sight of God's presence in the picture. Apocalyptic literature is about hope, but it is somehow countercultural. When we face difficult times, the conventional words we hear would sound more like this: don't worry, it will come to you, you'll be just fine, everything will fall in place, etc., etc. The way apocalyptic literature expresses hope is that it's deeply rooted in reality. It doesn't varnish things. It tells the truth. It describes how bad things can get, because that's when hope and faith are needed more than ever. Hope in this case doesn't come from thinking that all will be fine. It comes from the assurance of God's presence and God's love, no matter how difficult things can turn. Apocalyptic literature, which Luke's gospel message is all about today, is about the assurance of God's love for us in the midst of chaos and confusion. And that's hard to take, because we are used to holding on to faith and hope by telling people or by making ourselves believe that everything will be okay and things will be fine at the end of times. But we don't know when the end will be. What Jesus is saying is that things can turn bad before they turn good, and that only by endurance we can gain our souls. Here is the biblical paradox. Jesus' words in today's gospel message will invite us to live in peace, to be at peace, and to stay faithful to God, trusting that He will have the final word precisely when things are not pretty, or when they are about to turn worse than they already are. Today's gospel message is an invitation to look for God's presence in the midst of our challenges, and to look for opportunities to testify of His love and to bear witness. With a gospel message like this, we are invited to see God's love at work in our family issues, in our fears, in our failures, in Christ's suffering on the cross. Because if we, Christ's disciples today, don't do it, who will? If we don't see hope and faith in the midst of our challenges as Christ's disciples today, who will? So hold on to faith. Don't let the temporary realities of this broken world distract you from God's love. Here is the promise we can hold on to. God's love is with us. And at the very end of time, things will be fine. Truly, finally, and eternally fine. Justice and love will prevail, making the best story ever told. Much better than the happiest Hollywood movies we could ever think about. A story in which the bad guys will turn good, and the already good guys will be better. A story in which the hair will not fall from our heads. Isn't that great, guys? Isn't that great? And I'm not quite there yet. But in the meantime, all we can do is to hold on to Christ's love and be patient. That is Jesus' explicit advice to his disciples today after his report of the bad news. By your endurance, you will gain your souls. And by endurance, he does not refer to heroic standing still. It is more about holding on to God's love in a way that when people ask you, how did you survive that? Referring to your worst experiences in life, you could respond in total honesty and say, I don't know. It was God's grace and God's love that got me through it. All I did was to hold on to God's love strongly. That's the best way to bear witness. That is what the first disciples did. We can summarize it this way: hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but above all, remember that everything could come to an end, but never, ever will God's love for us in Christ come to an end. If we live and share that truth, we will be bearing great witness. May we do so. Amen.